This is a cool church. Join me in our call to worship. May the light of God's love push back the darkness. God is making all things new. Let us trust in God whose love shines through Jesus Christ. And let us sing our hymn of praise, number 52, O Worship the King.
Just as I am, thy love unknown has broken every barrier down. Now to be thine, thine alone, O Lamb of God, I come. Just as I am, of thy great
Brothers said of my dad that when he was a young boy, he was a tremendous athlete. But he never had an opportunity, really, to play much organized sports because his family was poor, and he needed to work to help out with the bills. After high school, he enlisted in the Army and went off to fight in World War II, serving on Okinawa and Guam and several of the islands leading up to the Japanese mainland. After the war, he came home and married my mother, and they started in on a family. My older sister, Karen, came first, then me, and then my younger brother, Steve. And I suppose it was because my father had this athlete in him that he had never been able really to fully express, that he decided that his children were going to have every opportunity to play sports. And he took it upon himself to train us up in the art of football and basketball, and most especially baseball. As a young child, I remember my dad taking me out on the street in front of our house on warm summer evenings, and we would play catch together at 5 or 6 years old. And as I got a little bit older and a little bit better, he would throw ground balls to me, and I would field them and pretend I was throwing to first base. And then he would throw high fly balls to me, and I would catch them and pretend that I was throwing a runner out at home plate. And then when I got to a more advanced stage at about 8 years of age, my dad decided it was time to teach me how to throw a curveball. So he taught me the mechanics of throwing a curveball, and that night I threw my first curveball right over his head and through the front windshield of his car. Now, he was not upset about that. He was upset that I did not have the right mechanics for the curveball. So he went over that with me, and that night I did throw a ball that actually curved. I think it was because of my dad's efforts with me that I was able to, when I was 10 years old, make a Little League baseball team comprised mostly of 12-year-olds. And it was a great team. There was Big George Erickson, who hit, it seemed, 2 or 3 home runs every game. There was George Leslie at shortstop who never made an error. And there were lesser skilled kids, too, like the coach's son, Paul, who never got a hit and made a lot of errors, but he was, after all, the coach's son, and you know how that goes. Well, our team that year had a phenomenal season. We won all our games and won the championship of the Tris Speaker Little League. And that made us eligible to go into the city series, playing against the champions of the other 8 or 10 little leagues in the city. And we made it all the way through our division and ended up in the city championship game. Well, at that game, we encountered something we had never encountered before, and that was a pitcher we could not hit. This kid was so fast that before you knew the ball left his hand, it was thumping into the catcher's mitt, and the umpire was calling you out on strikes. So things were pretty grim. He mowed us down in the first inning. He mowed us down in the second inning. And in the third inning, in the fourth inning, in the fifth inning, no one had even gotten a hit. And then we came to the last of the sixth inning, you know, the last inning in Little League baseball. Well, our coach called us over to the bench, and we had that big rah-rah kind of huddle that you have when you're behind and you're going to lose unless something big happens, and the coach gave us that big, inspiring win one for the Gipper kind of thing. And we were all pumped up, and so the first batter went up to bat and struck out. And the second batter went up and struck out. And then the coach's son, Paul, went up to bat. Now, we all knew what was going to happen. We were basically packing our bags and thinking about what we were going to do in the off season, when the coach spoke these terrifying words: "Singley, go pinch hit for Paul." I wanted to say, I'm 10 years old. I'm not ready for this. You're going to be the cause of my death. But I was just a little kid, and who am I to argue with the coach? So up to the plate I went with my little bat, shaking like a leaf. I put one toe into the batter's box, and poof, strike one. I hadn't even seen the kid wind up. So I stepped out of the batter's box and regained my breath and stepped back in, and poof, strike two. Well, at this point in time, I figured I needed my dad. So I stepped out of the batter's box and I looked for my dad because I knew he would be able to shout something to me, give me some tip that would allow me to maybe at least swing at the ball. I looked over there, but my Dad wasn't there. And I looked over here, and I couldn't find him there either. And I looked over here in the grandstands, but my father wasn't there. My father was nowhere to be found, and I was 10 years old, about to get killed. So with great trepidation, I stepped into the batter's box, and the pitcher wound up, and you know what happened. Slapped a line drive right up against the right center field fence for a single. And big George Erickson came up next and hit the first pitch out of the park for a 2-run homer, and we won the city championship 2-1. Later, I found my dad in the parking lot. I said, "Where were you?" He said, "When the coach sent you in, I got so nervous I got sick, and I had to come out here to throw up." Then he asked me, "Well, what did you figure out? How is it that you got your hit?" And I said, "All I could remember is what you've been drilling into me since I was just a little boy. Keep your eye on the ball." Keep your eye on the ball. That's good advice, not only in baseball, but also in life. And it's especially an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to the Christian life and life in the church. Today's reading from 1 Corinthians is one of my favorites because it's Paul's way of saying to the Corinthian people, keep your eye on the ball. Here was a church, maybe 50 or 60 members tops. And in that church of 50 or 60 people, there were 7 or 8 factions that were all the time up against each other. Some of them argued that, I follow Paul. I like the preaching of Peter. Somebody else liked the preaching of Apollos, who was a very eloquent speaker of the day. It's sort of like it is here. You know, we have preaching fan clubs in our church. Tim has a fan club. Rhonda evidently left with her fan club. I even have a fan club. In fact, one of the happiest and funniest moments in our life is when one of you calls the church office during the week and you say, "Who's preaching Sunday?" And Pat or whoever it is says that it's so-and-so, it's Tim or Rhonda or Marty, and the person on the other end of the line says, "Oh, good, we're having company in, and I want them to hear him or her preach." And otherwise, we would have just gotten a tea time. Well, the Corinthians had their little preaching fan clubs, and they argued all the time about what to do about people who were committing sin. And they were worried about whether or not Christians should file lawsuits against other Christians. And they were even arguing about whether or not there had been, in fact, a resurrection from the dead in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. They were a church that was fighting about everything. And so St. Paul needed to write this letter that says, I understand all the things that you're worried about, but they are not the big things. Keep your eye on the ball. And the ball, in this case, is the message of the cross. We Christians have a tendency to major in the minors, to fill ourselves up with things that really, in the long run of life, don't amount to a whole heck of a lot. In my first church, there was what I like to call the great toilet paper caper. That was a year at an annual meeting when old Jack, who is the chair of the Prudential Committee, sort of like the Board of Trustees, except even more conservative than ours, Jack got up and he was absolutely upset because someone had gone and bought toilet paper without permission. And that had blown the whole toilet paper budget for the year. And Jack wanted judgment and wrath. And he stood up and demanded to know who it was who had gone out and bought toilet paper without permission. And that's when Jack's wife raised her hand and said, "Honey, it was on sale, and I thought it would be good for the church." How often we worry about things like toilet papers and lines in budgets and whether or not it's too bright in here or whether or not it's too cold or too hot. But what do those things ultimately matter? They don't really matter a whole lot in terms of people's lives. What we Christians are called to do is to keep our eye on the ball. And the ball is the message of the cross. The message of the cross is first and foremost a message of hope, of unbridled hope. You know, we experienced a miracle in our family yesterday. Yesterday morning at about 9 a.m., our little 5-month-old granddaughter, Avery, rolled over. Her mother, yeah, thank you. Her mother, Bethany, our daughter Bethany, saw it coming, so she ran and got the video camera and just waited for the little girl. And finally, soon enough, she threw her leg over, and she went from her belly to her back. And she was over, and when she got there, she threw her legs up in the air, and her arms went up in the air, and this big smile came across her face as though she had just reached the peak of Mount Everest. That's a visualization. That's an illustration of hope. You know, we can all see ourselves as being in a particular position in life. And maybe where you are in life right now is a really hard place to be. Maybe you are lying on your stomach in the middle of some huge family problem. Or maybe you're facing something with your health that makes you feel helpless. But you need to know that there is another side of the carpet. There is the opportunity to roll over onto your back because the gospel is a gospel of hope. And our job is to help people see that about themselves and to work with other people in helping them to find the other side to life. You know, there's a lot of violence in our world, isn't there? But do we dare see the other side to that? Do we dare see the coming of a day of peace? There are an awful lot of people who do hateful, unloving things to each other. But do we dare see the other day, the new day, God's day, when hatred will be turned into love? And you see, if we can see that there is this other side of God's hope for us and for others and for the world, then these are the things that we begin to work for. We look into other people's lives to see how we can help them roll over into the new day of hope. Last week it was so wonderful to have Sue Anderson from Iva's Place come and speak to us about the important work they do with abused women. Many women find themselves in a place in life where they are trapped. It's as if they are like little Avery, lying on their belly and never able to get out from underneath what's going on. And yet through the work of Iva's Place, and I know many of you are involved with it, you help women roll over. You help women find a new day and new hope. The message of the cross is a message of hope. And it's a message of reconciliation, too. You know, I think every time I come into the sanctuary and look up here and see this beautiful 20-foot cross, it just strikes me how it talks about people being together. The upright here seems to me to connect God with human beings, with people like you and me. And then the crossbar seems to me to be God's arms reaching out to pull everybody in. There's an awful lot of division in our world, but we Christians are called to the message of reconciliation. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story in Exodus 32 where Moses has been walking with the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt long enough to know that he doesn't want to walk with them anymore. These are the most irritating people in the world. I mean, these are worse than church people. They are complaining and grumbling all the time. They have been released to freedom, but now they're worried that they don't have McDonald's hamburgers to have for supper anymore. And some of them even want to go back to Egypt because life was a little bit easier. So Moses goes up on top of the mountain one day, and he tells God about how rotten these people are and about how he's had it up to here with those people, and he just wants to spit them out of his mouth. And God says, you know, I'm ticked off with them too. I'll tell you what, I'm going to let you get to the promised land. But these guys, I'm going to send a B-52 over these people, and we're going to drop a nuke, and that's going to be it for them. And then Moses thinks about it, and he says, you know, I really want to go to the promised land, but not without them. Not without them. Can you look east in our world and north and south and west and say that? Not without them, not without them, not without them, not without them. My Bible says God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. And the world will not be made right just by getting a bunch of us Christians saved and sent up to heaven while the rest of the world goes to hell. That's not God's plan. The message of the cross is the message of reconciliation. There's been going around on the internet lately something I think that really is very touching related to the shooting of Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. We've all been following that, and we continue to pray for Mrs. Giffords' recovery. But what was going around was this, and I think it's just so very poignant. It says, "This is America, where a white Catholic male Republican judge was murdered on his way to greet a Democratic Jewish woman member of Congress who was his friend. Her life was saved initially by a 20-year-old Mexican-American gay college student, and eventually by a Korean-American combat surgeon. And those who died were eulogized by an African-American president. We are at our best when we are together. This is God's vision for the world. God has created a world of interdependence where everyone is needed to make the world right. That's what the season of Epiphany is all about. The manifestation that God's love is not for you, it is for us. All of us. The message of the cross is a message of hope, message of reconciliation, and it is a message of commitment. Because Jesus said, if you want to come after me, you have to pick up your cross and follow me. The cross demands a personal decision. The cross demands a commitment from you and me to walk with Jesus, to take our part in building the kingdom of God. But you know, many of us don't want to. We live in an American culture where everything is done for us. And in the church, we want other people to do things for us. I remember one night in my first church when Henry, the church custodian, called me about 10:30 at night. Henry lived a few doors down from the church. We lived a few doors down from the church in the church parsonage. And Henry said, "Marty, I just wanted to let you know that I just drove by the church and the lights are all on." I went, "Yeah? Well, I just thought maybe somebody ought to go in and turn off the lights." And I said, "Henry, do you have a key?" "Yeah." "Were you by the church with the lights on?" "Yeah." "Well, why didn't you go in and turn off the lights?" And he said, "Well, because I thought that was your job." We all will give the job to somebody else, but that's not where the faith is lived. In our church, we have many people who have made the commitment to serve the Lord in many ways. Today, we are privileged to see before us the commissioning of Stephen ministers, people who have committed themselves to 50 hours of training and then to 2 years of service as Stephen ministers. These are the people who walk with you and me when times get rough, when we have burdens to bear and no one to help us bear them. Those times in our lives, and you know what I'm saying, when it's time for the friends and others to go back to their lives, but you're still left with your loss, still left with your hurt, and maybe you just need someone to talk to or go out to lunch with or to pray with. Stephen ministers come alongside. Stephen ministers are one of the most important ministries in our church, but they represent the personal commitment that people make to make a church a great church. And this is a great church because of the commitments that people have made. So in just a few moments, we're going to install our Stephen ministers. But before we get to that, I want to say to you what St. Paul said to the Corinthians: keep your eye on the ball.